Welcome to Canusa Street, a podcast at the intersection of the issues and policies between Canada and the United States. Here are your hosts, Beth Burke and Chris Sands.
Hello, and welcome back to Canusa Street. I'm Beth Burke with the Canadian American Business Council, joined by my always wonderful, fabulous, fantastic co-host, Christopher Sands of the Woodrow Wilson Center. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great, Beth. Thank you very much. I think I can live up to wonderful. It's been a good week so far, and I don't know about fabulous, but wonderful it certainly is.
Well, I'm so glad to hear it. It's always great to see you here on Canusa Street. And we are thrilled. We have a very special guest with us today. The Canadian American Business Council was recently at his last stomping grounds. We spent some time at NORAD back in March, and I'm really excited to dig in and ask some questions about his time there. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Chris, to do a proper introduction, and then we'll just jump right into it.
That's fantastic, Beth, and I'm excited too. I love it when you travel and bring things back. I just didn't expect you to bring back a general from your trip to Colorado Springs. That's pretty good. Glen VanHerck is a retired U.S. Air Force general who most recently served as commander of the United States Northern Command, NORTHCOM, and North American Aerospace Defense Command. So those are two things. One's a Canada-U.S. command, one's a U.S. command, and he held both jobs concurrently. That's the way it's done. He's a graduate of the University of Missouri and commissioned through the Reserve Officer Training Program, ROTC program, which is, I know a lot of people who've been through the ROTC program, but you started young. You have a diverse background that includes operational and training assignments in the F-15C Eagle, the F-35A Lightning II, the B-2A Spirit, and the B-1B Lancer aircraft. So some pretty sophisticated aircraft. And served as an instructor pilot and a flight examiner on the F-15C, B-2A, and T-6A Texan II. Sounds like half the robots on Star Wars all in one go. As a Major General, he commanded the United States Air Force Warfare Center. His staff assignments included tours in the B-2 program, Element Monitor at Headquarters Air Combat Command, the Director of Operations at Headquarters Air Force Global Strike Command, and the Director of Plans and Integration at the U.S. Strategic Command and Vice Director Strategy, Plans and Policy J5 in the Joint Staff. I know, Beth, you've told me several times you don't want to fall into the Washington trap of having acronyms, but that just made his bio that much longer. But we're very excited to have you, General VanHerck. Welcome to Canusa Street.
Well, Chris and Beth, it's an honor to be with you, and I look forward to chatting about my time as the commander, the 26th commander of NORAD, which was an incredible blessing, and the 9th commander of the United States Northern Command.
It's amazing. Well, I think that's a great place to start. I think before we dive in and start asking specific questions, why don't you give us the 15,000 feet up overview of your time as commander?
Absolutely. So, as I said, I was very privileged to be the 26th commander of NORAD and the 9th commander of the United States Northern Command. I think the most noble mission you can have if you serve is defending your homeland, defending North America, both Canada and the United States, and doing that with incredible people, incredible Canadians, incredible Americans. We had allies and partners there, military and civilian. Before I was the commander, which I took over in August of 2020, I served on the Joint Staff for more than 3 years, and I worked for Chairman Dunford first, and then Chairman Milley. And I was very fortunate that that job ended up as a director, really prepared me, I think, to operate at the combatant command, binational command level. And I felt more comfortable coming into the commands, and it's plural, it's two commands, than I did any other command. And those jobs allowed me to really think about what is it that we need to do to move defense of North America, continental defense, homeland defense forward. And so I came in, I think, with a little bit of a different philosophy than some of my predecessors. And the first one was focused on policy. What policy did I need to defend North America? Believe it or not, I didn't have guidance or policy on what do you want me to defend? And to this day, to my knowledge, Canada has not given me that policy yet. I did get some of it out of the Defense Department, but there's much more work to be done there. And suffice to say, you can't defend everything. So getting policy on what are the most crucial things to defend is really crucial. And when I say defend, I don't necessarily mean with missiles and airplanes. It may be through non-kinetic means. It may be through cyber defenses. Those are some of the changes that I focused on. I came in, I think, with a different strategy, Beth, than some of my predecessors. I wasn't as focused on in-game kinetic defeat, shooting things down in North America. I was actually more focused on what I would say is campaigning day to day to create deterrence options, doing that with my fellow commanders around the globe, and most importantly, with our allies and partners, and getting further left. And what I mean by that is rather than in-game missile over the country, is getting further left to before the missile is launched or just soon thereafter to generate an effect. And doing that in campaigning creates deterrent effects. I'm very proud of our time operationalizing both NORAD and NORTHCOM. You had said at the 15,000 foot level, what does that really mean? It really means making the commands warfighting commands. In the past, folks didn't really think of NORTHCOM especially as a warfighting command. It was kind of the hurricanes and wildfires defense support to civil authorities commands. But we found out pretty quickly that we need to be ready to fight in our homelands, fight from our homelands to a forward fight. And so we focused on that, and we stood up a Joint Operations Center. That's important to do warfighting. And we found out really quickly that the things that we do are operations, whether it be a PRC spy balloon, whether it be Operation Allies Welcome, where we welcome 80,000 Afghans, whether we do COVID, those are all operations. So it was important. And institutionalizing a couple of things, the Joint Strategic Planning System, which is the planning system the department uses to get out in front, if you will, of the budget cycle. And so it was important to me to put some predictability in the lives of our people and to be ready when the tasks came in for information. And the way you do that is throughout the year, as you do exercises, you do training, campaigning, you find yourself with needs, requirements. You throw those in a bin, and when the time comes to put a budget together, you're not creating something from start. You've actually done that over the past year, and that's really important. I'll conclude here, Beth, with I got there, and we were in the height of COVID. And so it was important that we were able to move and continue what we're doing in COVID, and glad to say we were able to do that. Operation Allies Welcome, I mentioned. We went through civil unrest, southwest border challenges, a PRC spy balloon, Russia, Ukraine. Those are some of the challenges. I wish I could tell you that I left the place a safer place, North America safer. I can't say that. That's not the case. It's the most dynamic and challenging environment that we've seen.
Yeah, well, I think that is a really important and helpful overview. And I know Chris and I both want to follow up on lots of points. So Chris, why don't you hop in?
Well, I was just going to ask about, and I guess you might have seen this at the J5 because you're dealing with the various services, but about jointness and the seams between what was your jurisdiction when a threat might have come from Pacific Command or territory, or it might be happening outside. And you were in a unique position because you have the other U.S. commands. Then you have NORAD, which is a Canada-U.S. command. So you've got CJOC, or the Canadian Joint Operations Command, as your sort of Canadian Defense of Canada. All of these organizations. And then for things like emergency response, you have parts of DHS that you were coordinating with. How did you manage to get people to coordinate across those different lines? I mean, people can be very territorial. Hey, this is my patch, that's your patch, but you have to coordinate to be effective in a job like this, I would think. How did you find that, both with your fellow Americans and also with the Canadians?
Well, it's all about relationships, partnership building, trust. So when I got there, I went and visited many of the key stakeholders. When the Secretary of Homeland Security, on day 2 of the job, I was in his office meeting with him. The FEMA Administrator Criswell, we met multiple times. She came to the house for dinner. All those kind of relationships. My trips to Canada and having the CJOC commander come to NORTHCOM and over for dinner. All those relationships are crucial. You hit a crucial point. Call it jointness, call it combined, but the world is no longer regional problem sets. The world is full of global and all-domain problem sets, and we are set up, we being the United States, through our unified command plan, to approach it from a regional perspective. One of the things I focused on very, very hard was getting away from a regional perspective and approaching, whether it be warfighting, whether it be campaigning, whether it be responding to disasters, from a global and all-domain integrated perspective. And I think that's something that we have to continue to work on.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things you've touched on now, and I know I just have to ask about, is the balloon incident. So last year, NORAD made headlines for identifying, tracking, and ultimately removing the Chinese balloon over North American airspace. What can you tell us about that balloon incident and how it unfolded and the military's response in the aftermath?
Okay, well, this may take me a while, Beth, but I'm happy
please.
to answer that question. Well, first, let me be very clear. It was a spy balloon. You know, there are people still questioning, and the Chinese will tell you it was a weather balloon. I have put my hands on it. I have seen it up close. It is a spy balloon, and there is no doubt about that. The second thing I would tell you is that the outcome, irrelevant of political motivations, and there were plenty of them, I think was about as good as it could have been. And by that, I mean, we know that they didn't collect against us. And I won't go into the classified details of how we know that, but we know that for a fact. We also know that we mitigated any potential collection they might have done ahead of time by stopping emissions, putting things under cover, those types of things. We maximized our collection by shooting it down and learning a lot. And of course, we maximized the fact that the Chinese have an overt or covert program at the time, now an overt program around the globe using these balloons. And the final thing, and the most important thing, is the U.S. and Canadian people were safe, the way we handled that. And that's a big thing, and I'll talk a little bit about it. Let me just walk through some lessons, if you will, and I think it's key, some key gaps in domain awareness and information sharing is really what this comes down to. My first exposure to potential Chinese or PRC balloons was during an intelligence brief in August of 2022. I was not briefed that any had overflown North America. I was briefed about a program, and I gave direction to my team, including my lawyers at that time, to go figure out our legal basis for taking actions. How would that look? And turns out that direction was pretty good. We went and figured out that if one of these things did fly over North America, we knew exactly what the legal basis would be. So we did that. I didn't hear anything else about any balloons until the 27th of January in 2023, at which point I was advised through an intel channel that there was a balloon approaching North America off the Aleutians in Alaska. And they're likely going to enter into Alaskan airspace, North American airspace, the evening of the 27th, maybe the day of the 28th. So I put together a plan to go identify what this object was. I was going to follow standard NORAD procedures, what's called Serial 9 Rules of Engagement, go investigate. We put a package together that included 2 F-35s, 2 F-16s, and AWACS, and launched that package to go take pictures and take a close look. I had the authority to engage that object, it turned out to be the balloon, if it was demonstrating hostile intent, such as dropping weapons, shooting missiles, those types of things, or hostile act, which is actually the shooting missiles or something. Hostile intent would be maneuvering to seek an advantage or something like that. And my assessment was it wasn't doing that. So I didn't have the authority under NORAD to shoot it down at that point. And so I put a plan together to notify the chairman, the secretary, the CDS, the chief of the defense staff, every 12 hours what the status was. And I started that on the 28th of January. And from there until the 1st of February, we continued to monitor the balloon until it entered into the United States. I will tell you quite candidly, and General Ayer would probably back that up. I sent him a message and said, hey, look, it's going to enter Canada. And I believe that was on the 30th of January. If you want me to take any action, we need to have a discussion, and we need the Prime Minister and the President to talk. We didn't take any action. Those are civilian decisions, not military decisions, and I'm fine with that. So I'm not going to go into the politics, whatever side you want. On the 31st of January, I left NORAD and went to Washington, D.C. I had some engagements there. Before I left, I told my team, I said, this is going to become a national emergency while I'm gone. It's going to enter into the airspace. And sure enough, on the 1st of February, that's exactly what happened. And I happened to be in D.C., where I could engage. The Secretary of Defense was in Asia. He was in Korea and then the Philippines, I believe. And we worked our way through everything there. The key issue here is really the decision to engage or not. And what was the driving factor really is civilian safety. Let's just be clear. And what we did was we worked with NASA early on to try to figure out what would the debris field look like from an object, let's call it a balloon, now we know it is, that's 200 feet tall, several hundred feet across, like the size of 3 school buses, and weighs thousands of pounds, and it's at 65,000 feet. Imagine that falling out of the sky. That's what we had to figure out, and the first thing came back and said, well, it could be about 60 miles by 60 miles. So that's what we're weighing on. Do you engage it or not? I'll just be very clear. The guidance from the president was to shoot it down as soon as possible if we could do it safely. And so we continued to monitor. And as you can imagine, as you go east, the population density grows and grows. And so the decision was made to shoot it down off the coast as we did of South Carolina. Real quick, I'll just summarize. During that time frame, we basically went down to about a 6 mile by 6 mile box of debris of where it would fall. And so my guidance, when I told and gave the execution order as delegated from the president to the secretary, and we'll talk about that in a second, was to shoot it down exactly 6 miles off the coast to keep people safe on land, but also to keep it within United States territorial waters inside the 12 nautical miles so we could recover it. And I'm proud to say the team from Langley Air Force Base in the 1st Fighter Wing executed perfectly and shot it down exactly where we were told them to do, to shoot it down. Now, I talked about legal issues earlier. I shot the balloon down, or the team did, in my NORTHCOM hat, and that's really important to understand. Although we did everything in NORAD up front, the legal basis that was made was a United States law, and therefore we kept it within United States channels on the legal basis. So I did that in my NORTHCOM hat, but ironically, I passed the execution order through a Canadian. And so I'm still very proud of that. Key lessons. Domain awareness. We didn't see that thing very far out. And information sharing. There were folks in the intel community and other places that could have warned me much earlier. That has been corrected. Education. I think it opened a lot of eyes on the vulnerability of North America to flying objects, various objects, because it gave me a chance to talk. I testified 12 times that year, 2023, 6 times in the immediacy of the balloon, and took an opportunity to educate each time. One time I was asked by one of our members of Congress, well, are you going to budget for what you need to solve these problems you're talking about? And I said, I have been budgeting for them for my 3 years here. Are you not reading what I'm putting in the request? And so I think the education opportunity was worth it. NORAD procedures really didn't change. They remain pretty much unchanged today. It wasn't a procedural problem. And the PRC, I would tell you, continues their ambitions to work a high-altitude network of manned and unmanned capabilities for command and control and ISR. And so that's really kind of the story, Beth.
Oh, it's an amazing story. Since you talked a little about NORAD, I'm going to harken back to something you said earlier, which is the uniqueness of this command in defending your own country. And Canada's just came out with a defense policy update, and it really talked a lot about what Canada could do in the Arctic to improve domain awareness and their ability to defend their own homeland. I wonder if you could talk about two aspects of that. First, whether you think that changes the debate with Canadians who've been, I think there's been a lot of hesitation about spending big money on defense. There was sort of a peace dividend feeling and maybe a lower threat perception on the part of a lot of Canadians. Why are we spending money on the defense? And they are clearly now putting money into the Arctic. And it is domestic spending. And it's going to create a lot of benefits for people in the Arctic, the residents of that area, just in terms of connectivity and so on. There are some collateral benefits there. And it's always sort of said in Washington, it's NATO modernization. And we heard the buzzword for a while. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what Canada's doing, how important that NATO modernization, NORAD modernization is, and how it fits in within what you were saying earlier, defending your own country being different than projecting into other territories.
So first of all, I would tell you that I am very happy with the defense policy update and what I see. I see many sprinkles of information that came out of NORAD, things that I've had discussions with the minister, both Minister Anand, Mr. Blair with the CDS. So I applaud that. The Arctic, I think, is an education challenge in a lot of ways. Why the Arctic matters. 80% of your population lives within a couple hundred miles of the United States, and a lot of it over here. But you have to understand the resources, the natural resources that are in the Arctic are going to create competition for those resources. As environmental change opens up the Arctic, you find that there are vessels wanting to sail through, and claims are going to be now challenged, whether they're Canadian, U.S., Russian, and that can create potential friction. The shortest route to North America is through the Arctic, whether that be in the air domain, the land domain, the undersea domain, the sea domain. It doesn't matter. So the Arctic absolutely matters. It matters economically, militarily, in multiple ways. And so very happy. I would tell you that, as the commander of NORTHCOM, I was charged with the responsibility of being DOD's Arctic advocate for capability. And that's something that I talked about a lot, often. I was very proud of the department. In 2019, they put out an Arctic strategy. They're updating that strategy right now. Every service put out an Arctic strategy. What was disappointing is they never resourced those strategies. And so that I can say the same thing in Canada. We never resourced the strategy in Canada to put in place the means to campaign day to day, the means to respond for search and rescue. There are very limited capabilities for that in the Arctic. The domain awareness in the Arctic is challenged. So the over-the-horizon radars, which are in your DPU and your budget, will be crucial for a defense of North America to get further left, as I was talking about earlier, to build the infrastructure. So let's go back to NORAD, and then I'll stop, Chris. NORAD really is organized around technology from the 70s and the early 80s. The North Warning System that replaced the DEW line, your CF-18s, many of our fighters, the airfields and infrastructure was from a time when it was vastly different. The Soviet Union was the primary threat, and they had to fly bombers over at 36,000 feet and drop gravity weapons on North America. That is no longer the case. They can stand off and shoot missiles from over Russia or from submarines now from thawing waters in the Arctic. And if you're not there to monitor, you are ceding that space, and that's crucial in my mind.
Absolutely. Fascinating. But you said at the outset, it's education. Do you think Canadians are starting to appreciate how important they are in defense and how much we're depending on them to spend more? Or is that sort of reluctance to spend, that fiscal conservatism still a problem for the Canadian Defence Forces?
Well, I'll speak for the Defense Forces, and all the folks that I served with fully understood, fully supported, fully understood the need to modernize and go forward. Very fortunate to work with several of your CDSs. Ultimately, Chris, this is a political decision. It is a civilian decision. And so I'll go back to your DPU, your Defense Policy Update. Happy to see the policy. The question is, are the actions going to match the words? And that's where the people matter, and have to express that to your political leadership, that we must defend ourselves. We must be that continued global country that we have been, or else we're going to become potentially irrelevant. Maybe the appetite exceeds the capability. And oh, by the way, when it comes to the Arctic, the United States is behind as well. And I've said this in public testimony. Hey, to play the game, and you got to be on the field. And we're in a locker room developing a game plan. And that's disappointing.
Well, not to make a hard pivot, but I know we're running short on time, and my children would never let me hear the end of it if I don't ask you about the most popular mission that NORAD has, which is tracking Santa as he makes his way around the world. We are quite rigorous in my household on following all of your tracking. But could you tell us a little bit about how this started and what it feels and looks like at headquarters?
Yeah, so I had no idea, Beth, how big NORAD Track Santa was until I really got there.
It's huge.
I'll tell you, it is huge. It really is. And most people ask me about NORAD Track Santa. When I got there, I told you it was in COVID, and my team actually approached me about canceling NORAD Track Santa. And I said, I'm not going to be the guy that cancels Christmas. So we figured out how to do NORAD Track Santa, basically with COVID protocols, with a lot of help from folks. Now, it started by accident when a flyer from a department store posted a wrong phone number. That phone number led to the continental region at that time, Ops Center, where it was answered, and the colonel that answered it realized it was a young child looking for Santa Claus and how do you track Santa. And ever since then, we've continued with that tradition, and it reaches millions of people all over the globe. It's the largest program of its kind for either the Department of Defense or the Department of National Defense for Canada.
Well, it's amazing. And like I said, a huge hit in our household every year. So thank you for that. One of my big takeaways when we were there was this is just such a perfect example of the importance of the U.S.-Canada relationship, right? Collaborating and working together. And I don't know, I mean, my experience was very short and limited, but when I was in that building, it really felt like you couldn't tell who was American and who was Canadian because everyone worked so seamlessly together. And it was such an important testament to this relationship. And so, just wanted to say thank you for all of that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's like a single command. And one of the things I did when I got there was I merged the strategies into a single strategy. And I think that was crucial for everybody coming together as two commands. And always there can be friction, but we zeroed a lot of that out. And I was very proud of that.
Absolutely. I still remember, maybe a bit older, so I still remember the War Games movie where they were stopping a nuclear war. Matthew Broderick looked like he was all of 12, which he still looks now. He somehow never ages, but it was an early introduction to the importance of the command and Cheyenne Mountain, which I know is still usable, but it's Peterson Air Force Base. Otherwise, it's a tremendous operation, and anyone who has a chance to get out and see it is very lucky. It's a beautiful part of the world, but it's also such an important part of our defense. And to be honest, other than the Santa Tracker, I think a lot of us remain in ignorance of just how hard you work for our safety.
NORAD's more relevant today than it's ever been. In its heyday, back in the 70s, NORAD had more than, or approaching 2,000 fighters. Today it's a small fraction of that, and the threats have only grown more from Russia, from China, from around the globe. So NORAD still has a place as we move forward. we should continue to educate on the importance of NORAD.
Amazing. And to your point, one of the things that I walked away from our trip there was the conversation on threats was quite alarming. And the thing that I keep talking about now is the critical infrastructure collaboration and the threat that exists from not updating all of the shared infrastructure and the gateway to the Arctic and all that.
Yeah. So we didn't talk about that, but my strategy was really focused on that. It was an integrated deterrence strategy, not on deterrence by punishment, but deterrence by denial. And the difference is deterrence by denial is things that you do to create questions in any potential adversary's mind about their ability to accomplish their objectives. And resiliency is a crucial one. And that's cyber resiliency. It's resiliency of your transportation network, your electrical grid, everything that you do. I learned during COVID that we're not very resilient in our medical personal protective equipment, respiratory gear, et cetera. It's all made in China. And so that is a resiliency issue, a deterrence factor we need to get our arms around.
Yeah, General, the other thing that strikes me is space. We talked a little bit, now that we have a Space Force and there's some of those they're very much integrated part of our domain awareness, what we do in satellites, et cetera. And there's so many overlaps that it's almost the extra extension of the NORAD domain to go all the way up to near Earth orbit. And so important given some of the missiles that pass through some of that territory in a threat situation.
Well, you're exactly right, Chris. So without Space Command providing, early warning, for missiles, they provide it all. So the initial launch comes from the overhead persistent infrared satellites and satellite tracking capabilities. The radars that they have out there, whether it be at the end of the Aleutians, around in Japan and other places, those are Space Force radars supporting a NORAD mission, the early warning mission, and probably one of the most strategic missions that NORAD does. Is warning, threat warning, and attack assessment. Without the ability to do that, continuity of government suffers, the ability to survive strategic forces suffers, and now you have the potential for deterrence failure because of that. And that's why hypersonics are crucial, because they really evade those capabilities, and that erodes strategic deterrence.
I agree. And we should all take greater interest in what it is that protects us, who it is who protects us, and be a bit more appreciative of all of that. Freedom isn't free, as they say.
Exactly. Thank you very much.
Anytime.
This podcast is brought to you by the Canadian American Business Council and the Wilson Center. If you like this episode, help others find our show and give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.